They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds cut too deep. My name is Lena, and the first time my father Edward looked me in the eyes and called me ungrateful, I was 15. The second time, I was dead. He always favoured Alyssa, my half-sister with the perfect smile, the perfect grades, the perfect lies. When I cried, she smiled. When I spoke, he silenced me. And when I finally stood up for myself, he disowned me. Just like that. But fate, it's cruel and beautiful, because I was given a second chance. I opened my eyes in the past, 1 year before everything fell apart. And this time, I didn't chase his love. I didn't explain myself. I let him choose her again. I let him believe I was nothing, while I quietly became everything. By the time he saw the truth, I was already untouchable. My father, Edward Collins, CEO of Collins Enterprises, a man who built his empire on calculated risks and ruthless ambition, saw me as nothing more than an insurance policy. Alyssa was the apparent heir, the golden child destined to inherit his throne. I was the spare, the afterthought, the one he kept tucked away just in case. "Lena, darling," my mother would say, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Why don't you try a little harder? Alyssa manages to excel in both her studies and social life. You simply must apply yourself." "Such a disappointment," I'd hear her say, her carefully Botoxed brow furrowing in disapproval. "She'll never be the asset Alyssa is." My father's disdain was even more blatant. "Lena," he'd bark, his voice booming through the opulent study, "your quarterly progress report is abysmal. Alyssa would have doubled these figures by now." "Useless," he'd say, his eyes filled with a chilling indifference. "She's a Collins in name only." I excelled in my studies, mastering the intricacies of finance and business strategy. But my efforts were met with indifference, my accomplishments overshadowed by Alyssa's every frivolous achievement. She was the social butterfly, the darling of the society pages, while I was relegated to the sidelines, a shadow in my own home. Then came the mistake, a critical error in judgment on Alyssa's part, a risky investment that threatened to bring the entire Collins empire crashing down. I saw it coming, the warning signs flashing like neon lights in the company's financial reports. I tried to warn my father, to present him with an alternative strategy, a way to mitigate the damage. But he wouldn't listen. He saw only Alyssa, his golden child, his perfect creation. He dismissed my concerns, waved away my warnings, and accused me of jealousy, of trying to sabotage my sister's success. "You're just bitter, Lena," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've always been jealous of Alyssa's talent, her drive, her ability to shine." "She's trying to undermine her sister," he thought, his eyes filled with disgust. "Ungrateful wretch." And when the inevitable happened, when the investment collapsed and Collins Enterprises teetered on the brink of ruin, he didn't hesitate. He threw me under the bus, blamed me for the company's losses, and disowned me, severing all ties, cutting me off without a penny. "You're no daughter of mine," he spat, his voice venomous. "Get out of my sight and don't ever come back." I left with nothing but the clothes on my back and the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. The Collins mansion, the gilded cage that had been my prison, was no longer my home. I was adrift, alone, cast out by the family I had tried to save. And then, as the world crumbled around me, as Collins Enterprises finally collapsed under the weight of Alyssa's mistakes, as my father and sister lost everything, I died. Alone, penniless, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. It was a familiar scene, yet utterly disorienting. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Memories flooded back, a chaotic jumble of emotions. Betrayal, despair, the chilling indifference of my family. But something was different. The gnawing emptiness in my stomach was gone. My body felt whole. I looked down at my hands, no longer skeletal and frail, but strong and youthful. I stumbled to the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. It was me, but younger, healthier, alive. I was back in time. 1 year before the catastrophic investment. 1 year before my father would cast me aside like a broken toy. 1 year before the Collins empire would crumble, taking my family down with it. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the reality of my situation hitting me with the force of a tidal wave. I wasn't dead. I'd been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite the script, to change the ending, to play the game on my own terms. This time, I wouldn't be the dutiful daughter, the sacrificial lamb. This time, I wouldn't waste my breath trying to warn them, trying to save them from their own arrogance and greed. 1 year to prepare. 1 year to dismantle their empire brick by agonizing brick. This time, I wouldn't try to save them. I'd let them crash and burn. A cold, hard determination settled in my gut, replacing the fear and despair that had once consumed me. I would use my knowledge of the future, my understanding of their weaknesses, to orchestrate their downfall. I would play the obedient daughter, the naive pawn, while secretly plotting my revenge. I would watch as Alyssa, the golden child, made the same disastrous decisions, digging the grave for their empire. I would listen as my father, blinded by his pride and his misplaced faith in his favourite daughter, dismissed my concerns, scoffed at my warnings. And then, when the time was right, I would strike. I would use their own weapons against them, their own greed and ambition as their undoing. I would turn the tables, become the master of my own fate, the architect of their destruction. The plush offices of Goldman Sachs were a far cry from the sterile environment of the hospital room. I sat across the mahogany desk from Mr. Davenport, a man whose reputation as a shrewd investor was only surpassed by his air of bored indifference. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my conservative suit, my neatly pulled back hair, my carefully neutral expression. "Miss Collins," he began, his voice smooth and condescending, "your request is unconventional. A loan of this magnitude for someone with your limited experience." "Another pawn in her father's game," I heard him think, his eyes flickering with disdain. "She's probably just trying to fund another frivolous shopping spree." I smiled, a small, controlled movement of my lips. "Mr. Davenport, I assure you, my intentions are far from frivolous. This is a calculated investment, a strategic move based on extensive research and a deep understanding of the market." "Oh, really?" he thought, his skepticism evident. "And what, pray tell, is this brilliant strategy based on? Daddy's insider tips?" "I'd prefer to keep the details confidential," I said, my voice firm and confident, "but I can assure you the returns will be substantial, for both of us." I slid a folder across the table, a meticulously crafted presentation outlining my financial projections, my risk assessment, and my exit strategy. It was a masterpiece of deception, a carefully constructed illusion designed to appeal to his greed while concealing my true motives. My true motives of using the money to short my father's company stocks, essentially betting on its fail. A bet that would make me extremely rich. He scanned the document, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "This is impressive," he thought, his initial skepticism giving way to a flicker of interest. "She's done her homework. There might be something to this after all." But what he saw wasn't the whole picture. He saw a quiet, unassuming woman asking for a loan. I was playing a part, a carefully crafted performance for an audience of one. The loan was approved, the funds transferred to a newly created offshore account, hidden behind layers of shell corporations and anonymous transactions. I repeated the process with other banks, securing a vast fortune, a war chest to fuel my campaign against the Collins empire. My father, oblivious to my movements, continued to bask in his arrogance, his blind faith in Alyssa's abilities. He saw me as a pawn, a disposable asset to be discarded at his whim. He had no idea that I was the one playing the game, the one pulling the strings, the one orchestrating his downfall. The meticulous planning continued. I researched rival companies, identified their strengths and weaknesses, and strategically invested in their success. I gathered information, whispers of discontent, rumours of instability within Collins Enterprises, and used that knowledge to manipulate the market, to sow the seeds of doubt that would eventually lead to their collapse. I was a ghost in their world, a silent predator stalking its prey. They saw me as nothing, a harmless shadow, a forgotten daughter. They had no idea that I was the storm gathering on the horizon, the force that would soon shatter their world. Alyssa, with her designer wardrobe and her entourage of sycophants, was a walking, talking financial disaster. Her business acumen was limited to picking the most expensive champagne at shareholder meetings and charming investors with her dazzling smile. She was also my ticket to a fortune. I simply had to sit back and watch her self-destruct. "Lena, darling," she'd simper, her voice dripping with condescension. "Why don't you leave the important decisions to those of us who actually understand business?" "She's such an idiot," I'd hear her think, her thoughts a whirlwind of self-admiration and disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. "Daddy will never let her take over the company. It'll be mine someday." I played the role of the dutiful sister, the supportive sibling, offering praise for her disastrous ideas, nodding along to her nonsensical plans. I watched as she poured millions into failing ventures, seduced by the promises of quick returns, and blinded by her own arrogance. "This new acquisition is going to be huge, Lena," she'd gush, her eyes sparkling with misplaced confidence. "Just wait and see. I'll be making headlines." And I'll be laughing all the way to the bank, I'd think, a smirk playing on my lips. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. My father, blinded by his love for Alyssa, saw only her ambition, her drive. He dismissed her failures as minor setbacks, temporary bumps on the road to success. He couldn't see the gaping chasm that was opening beneath their feet, the financial abyss that was about to swallow them whole. "Alyssa has a knack for taking risks," he'd say, his voice filled with pride. "She's a true Collins, bold, fearless, and destined for greatness." "She's going to bankrupt us all," I'd think, a shiver of anticipation running down my spine, "and I'll be there to pick up the pieces." I watched as the company's profits dwindled, as investors grew wary, as the whispers of doubt began to circulate in the financial press. Alyssa, oblivious to the impending doom, continued her reckless spending, her lavish parties, her extravagant lifestyle. The stage was set, the pieces were in place. All of that remained was to wait for the final act, the inevitable collapse of the House of Collins. And I, Lena Collins, the forgotten daughter, the discarded heir, would be there to witness it all. A silent observer, a secret beneficiary of their downfall. The mahogany desk in my father's study was a battlefield, the disownment papers the declaration of war. He sat across from me, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes burning with the righteous anger that was as misplaced as it was intense. "Lena," he boomed, his voice echoing through the opulent room, "you have betrayed this family. Your actions, your blatant disregard for our legacy, have left me with no choice." He slid the papers across the desk. the crisp white sheets a stark contrast to the dark wood. "Sign this," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Sever all ties with this family. You are no longer a Collins." I looked at the document, the legal jargon swirling before my eyes. It was a finality, a severance, a complete and utter rejection. And yet, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of amusement. He thinks he's punishing me, I thought, a smirk playing on my lips. He thinks he's leaving me with nothing. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, a carefully crafted display of hurt and betrayal. "Father," I whispered, my voice trembling, "how can you do this to me? I tried to warn you, to save the company." "Lies," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "You were jealous of Alyssa. You wanted to see her fail. You wanted to destroy everything we've built." He's so predictable, I thought, my amusement growing. He can't see past his own delusions. I signed the papers, my hand steady, my resolve unwavering. The disownment was a formality, a theatrical gesture that meant nothing to me. I was already gone, already free. He watched me, his eyes filled with a smug satisfaction. He thought he was cutting me off, thought he was leaving me with nothing. He couldn't have been more wrong. As he signed the disownment papers, I was already counting my future millions. The loans I had secured, the investments I had made, the carefully orchestrated plan that was about to unfold. It was all falling into place. The Collins empire was about to crumble, and I, Lena Collins, the disposable daughter, the forgotten heir, would be the one to profit from its demise. The irony was delicious, a sweet revenge served cold. I left the study, my head held high, my footsteps echoing through the silent mansion. The gilded cage was open, and I was finally free. The world was my oyster, and I, Lena Collins, the woman they had discarded, was about to claim my pearl. The disownment was my liberation. Free from the suffocating confines of the Collins mansion, I could finally move without constraint, my actions cloaked in secrecy, my motives hidden behind a veil of anonymity. While my family revelled in their ignorance, I was building my empire. My first move was swift and decisive. With the millions I had secured through loans and careful investments, I shorted Collins Industries stock. It was a bold move, a calculated gamble against my own family. But I knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. I knew their empire was built on a foundation of sand, ready to crumble at the slightest tremor. The initial investment was just the beginning. I diversified my portfolio, spreading my wealth across a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts, making my movements untraceable, my motives obscured. I became a phantom, a whisper in the financial markets, my influence growing with each passing day. While they were busy squandering their inheritance, I was building my own, quietly, discreetly. I was becoming a force to be reckoned with. I invested in rival companies, carefully selecting those poised to capitalize on Collins Industries' inevitable decline. I funded their research, supported their expansion, and watched as their market share grew, slowly chipping away at my father's empire. I manipulated the market, spreading rumors, leaking information, creating ripples of doubt that eroded investor confidence in Collins Industries. I watched as their stock price fluctuated, a heartbeat growing weaker with each passing day. And when the opportunity arose, I struck. I bought out struggling businesses, companies that had once been part of the Collins empire, now discarded and undervalued. I restructured them, streamlined their operations, and turned them into profitable ventures, adding to my growing wealth and influence. My network expanded. I cultivated relationships with influential figures in the business world, people who saw me not as the disgraced Collins daughter, but as a rising star, a shrewd investor with a Midas touch. I became a sought-after advisor, my insights valued, my opinions respected. The Collins name, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now tarnished. its luster fading with each passing day. My father, blinded by his arrogance, couldn't see the writing on the wall. He was a king on a sinking ship, oblivious to the storm raging around him. And I, Lena Collins, the daughter he had cast aside, was the architect of his destruction. I was the silent force, the invisible hand guiding the market, shaping the future and building my own empire on the ashes of theirs. The day the Collins stock began its freefall was a symphony of chaos. The trading floor was a cacophony of shouts and frantic gestures, the air thick with tension and the scent of fear. I sat in my private office, a world away from the pandemonium, a glass of champagne in my hand, my eyes glued to the stock ticker. Each plummeting point was a note in the symphony of their destruction. It was beautiful. The whispers had become a roar, the rumours I had planted, the seeds of doubt I had sown, had blossomed into full-blown panic. Investors, once eager to be associated with the Collins name, were now scrambling to distance themselves. Their confidence shattered, their portfolios bleeding red. My father, his face pale and drawn, was a general on a losing battlefield. He barked orders, issued press releases, and made desperate pleas to his dwindling allies. But the tide had turned. The Collins empire, once an unassailable fortress, was crumbling before his eyes. "We need to stabilise the stock," he roared, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Buy back shares. Issue a dividend. Do whatever it takes." Too little, too late, I thought, a smirk playing on my lips. The vultures are circling, and they can smell the blood in the water. Alyssa, her designer clothes and forced smile doing little to hide her panic, was a shadow of her former self. The golden child, the heir apparent, was now facing the consequences of her incompetence, the reality of her own impending ruin. "This can't be happening," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Daddy, we have to do something." "You should have listened to me," I thought, a flicker of satisfaction in my eyes. "But you were too busy playing princess to pay attention to the real world." The stock ticker continued its relentless descent, each drop a hammer blow to their dwindling fortune. I watched, mesmerised, as their empire crumbled, their legacy reduced to a series of numbers on a screen. And then, when the time was right, I made my move. I cashed out my short positions, reaping a fortune from their misfortune. The millions I had invested, the seeds I had sown, had blossomed into a harvest of wealth and power. The Collins stockpile, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a graveyard of their ambition. And I, Lena Collins, the daughter they had discarded, was the sole inheritor of their downfall. Alyssa's world was collapsing. The designer clothes, the lavish parties, the adoring fans, all were gone. She was just a spoiled brat facing the consequences of her own stupidity. The mansion, once a playground for her whims, now echoed with the silence of their dwindling fortune. The servants, once eager to cater to her every desire, had disappeared, replaced by debt collectors and auctioneers. The laughter and music that had once filled the halls were replaced by the hushed whispers of creditors and the clatter of moving vans. "This isn't fair," she'd shriek, her voice raw with panic. "I don't deserve this. It's all Lena's fault. She's the one who should be suffering." She'd rage internally, her thoughts a maelstrom of envy and resentment. "She's the one who should be losing everything." But Lena, the sister she had always dismissed, the one she had ridiculed and belittled, was now living a life of luxury, her name whispered in the highest circles of power and wealth. Alyssa, meanwhile, was drowning in debt, her reputation in tatters, her future uncertain. The social invitations dried up, the fawning friends disappeared. The designers who had once clamoured to dress her now turned their backs, their loyalty as fleeting as the trends she had so desperately tried to emulate. She was alone, adrift in a world that no longer recognised her. a fallen princess stripped of her crown and her kingdom. The consequences of her incompetence, her arrogance, her blind faith in her own superiority were finally catching up with her. "Daddy," she'd plead, her voice cracking with desperation, "you have to fix this. You have to make it all go away." But her father, his own world crumbling around him, had no answers, no solutions. He was a broken man, his spirit crushed by the weight of his own mistakes, his legacy tarnished by his daughter's incompetence. Alyssa's implosion was a spectacle, a public display of the consequences of entitlement and unearned privilege. She was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the house of cards built on vanity and delusion could collapse at any moment. And as I watched her fall, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge, not anymore. It was about justice. It was about the restoration of balance, the righting of wrongs. It was about the triumph of the underdog, the rise of the forgotten daughter. Alyssa's downfall was a necessary step in my own ascent. Her destruction paved the way for my own empire, my own legacy. And as I watched her fade into obscurity, I knew that my time had come. The man who stood before me was a ghost of his former self. Gone was the imperious CEO, the titan of industry who commanded boardrooms and brokered deals with the confidence of a king. In his place stood a shell, a man broken by his own hubris, his eyes hollow, his shoulders slumped, his voice a mere tremor of its former boom. "Lena," he croaked, his hand outstretched in a plea for mercy, I need your help." The arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation. He came crawling back, hoping I'd still be the dutiful daughter, ready to bail him out, to forgive and forget the years of neglect and the ultimate betrayal. He couldn't have been more wrong. I looked at him, my expression unreadable, my heart a block of ice. The years of resentment, the pain of his disownment, the memory of my lonely death, it all rose to the surface, a tidal wave of bitterness threatening to consume me. "Help," I echoed, my voice laced with a chilling indifference. "You want my help? The daughter you cast aside? The one you deemed worthless? A failure? A stain on the Collins name?" He flinched, his eyes darting away, unable to meet my gaze. I made a mistake, Lena," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I see that now." "Now?" I thought, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Now, when you have nothing left to lose. Now, when your precious Alyssa has failed you." Alyssa, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and disbelief, stood behind him, her eyes burning with resentment. "Daddy," she hissed, her voice laced with venom, "how can you beg her for help after what she did? After she stole everything from us?" "Stole?" I thought, my amusement growing. She still doesn't understand. She still thinks she's entitled to everything, even the consequences of her own actions. "Silence, Alyssa," Edward snapped, his voice regaining a hint of its former authority. "This is between Lena and me." He turned back to me, his eyes pleading. "Lena, please," he begged. "I'll do anything. Name your price. Just save us." I looked at them, at the broken man and the spoiled princess, their world crumbling around them, their pride shattered, their future uncertain. And in that moment, I realized that my revenge was complete. They were already vanquished, defeated by their own arrogance and greed. "There's nothing left to save," I said, my voice cold and final. "You made your choice, Edward. Now, you have to live with it." My father's pleas were a broken record, a litany of regret and remorse that echoed through the sterile confines of my office. He knelt before me, his once proud head bowed, his voice choked with emotion. "Lena, my darling girl," he sobbed, "please forgive me. I was blind, foolish. I didn't see your worth, your strength. I cast you aside like a fool, and now I'm paying the price." Alyssa stood beside him, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Get up, Daddy," she hissed, her voice laced with contempt. "Don't grovel at her feet. She doesn't deserve your apologies." I watched them, my expression impassive, my heart a cold, hard stone. The years of neglect, the sting of his betrayal, the memory of my lonely death, it all swirled within me, a maelstrom of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I wouldn't let them see my pain, my anger, my vulnerability. I looked at him, at the man who had discarded me so easily, and felt nothing. He was a stranger, a relic of a life I no longer recognized. The father I had once longed for, the love I had craved. It was all gone, replaced by a vast emptiness, a chilling indifference. "Get up, Edward," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Your theatrics are tiresome." He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that quickly faded as he met my gaze. "Lena, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want. I'll give you anything." "Anything?" I echoed, a flicker of amusement in my eyes. "Even your precious company? Even your legacy? Even your pride?" He hesitated, the offer dying on his lips. He couldn't bring himself to say the words, to admit his complete and utter defeat. Alyssa, however, had no such qualms. "Don't you dare, Daddy!" she shrieked, her voice laced with panic. "Don't you dare give her anything! She doesn't deserve it!" I ignored her, my focus solely on my father. "Well, Edward," I pressed, my voice like ice, "what's it going to be? Your pride or your survival?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and desperation. He knew he had lost, knew that his empire, his legacy, was slipping through his fingers like sand. And he knew that I, the daughter he had discarded, was the one holding the hourglass, the one controlling his fate. I don't know," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Then you have nothing left to offer me," I said, my voice cold and final. "Leave, both of you. I have no more time for your pathetic pleas." They left, their departure a silent acknowledgement of their defeat. I watched them go, their backs slumped, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their regret. And as the door closed behind them, I felt a surge of triumph, a bittersweet victory over the family who had abandoned me, the family who had taught me the true meaning of indifference. The boardroom was a battleground, the air thick with tension and the scent of desperation. Edward Collins, his face etched with lines of worry and defeat, stood before the assembled directors, his voice a strained echo of its former authority. "We need a solution," he pleaded, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had once hung on his every word. "Collins Industries is on the brink of collapse. We need a miracle." A nervous silence filled the room. The directors, once eager to align themselves with the Collins name, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting away, their confidence shaken. Then the doors burst open and I walked in. Heads turned, whispers erupted, and a collective gasp filled the room. I ignored them, my gaze fixed on my father, a smirk playing on my lips. "I believe I have a solution," I announced, my voice calm and confident, a stark contrast to the panic swirling around me. Edward stared at me, his eyes widening with surprise and a flicker of hope. "Lena?" he choked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" "Saving the company, of course," I replied, my voice dripping with irony. "Or rather, what's left of it." I took a seat at the head of the table, the seat that had once been his, the seat that was rightfully mine. The directors, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe, watched me with a newfound respect. "Edward," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "you offered me a stake in the company. A lifeline, you called it. A chance to return to the fold, to reclaim my rightful place in the Collins legacy." He nodded eagerly, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. Yes, Lena, he said, his voice trembling. Anything. I'll give you anything you want. Anything? I echoed, my voice laced with amusement. Even control? Even the power to dismantle everything you've built? His face fell, the realization dawning on him. He thought he was offering me a lifeline. He didn't realize I was the one holding the scissors, ready to cut the cord. You see, Edward, I continued, my voice rising, I don't need your handouts. I don't need your scraps. I've built my own empire, my own fortune, and I've done it without you. Without your name, without your legacy. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. The directors, their eyes wide with shock, exchanged nervous glances. Edward, his face pale and drawn, looked like a man who had just been dealt a fatal blow. I own the majority of Collins Industries, I announced, my voice ringing through the room. I bought it piece by piece through shell companies and anonymous transactions. You were so busy clinging to your crumbling empire that you didn't even notice. A collective gasp filled the room. Edward stared at me, his mouth agape, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Alyssa, her face contorted with rage, let out a strangled cry. The takeover was complete. The Collins empire was mine, and I, Lena Collins, the daughter they had discarded, was now the queen. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a resounding crack, each strike a hammer blow to my father's legacy. The Collins Industries headquarters, once a symbol of their power and prestige, was now a sterile auction house, its walls lined with eager bidders, its air thick with the scent of greed and anticipation. Lot number 1, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming through the room. The Collins Industries flagship building, a prime piece of real estate in the heart of the financial district. The bidding frenzy began, a whirlwind of raised hands and shouted numbers, each offer a nail in the coffin of my father's empire. I watched from the balcony, a silent observer, my face a mask of impassivity. Edward stood in the crowd, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Alyssa clung to his arm, her sobs echoing through the room, her once flawless makeup streaked with tears. No, she whimpered, her voice barely audible. This can't be happening. Daddy, stop them. But there was nothing he could do. The empire he had built, the legacy he had cherished, was being dismantled before his eyes, piece by piece, sold to the highest bidder. Lot number 2, the auctioneer continued, his voice relentless. The Collins Industries manufacturing plant, a state-of-the-art facility with a proven track record of success. The bidding war intensified, fueled by the desperation of rival companies eager to capitalize on the Collins downfall. I watched as familiar faces, CEOs of companies I had secretly supported, raised their paddles, their eyes gleaming with triumph. Lot number 3, the auctioneer announced, his voice rising with excitement. The Collins Industries patent portfolio, a treasure trove of intellectual property with the potential to revolutionize entire industries. The bids flew fast and furious, the price escalating with each passing moment. I saw the desperation in my father's eyes, the realization that his life's work, his legacy, was being sold off to strangers, his name erased from the annals of history. The auction was swift and brutal, each piece of their empire sold to the highest bidder, their name, their legacy reduced to rubble. By the time the last gavel fell, the Collins empire was no more. The once mighty conglomerate, the symbol of their wealth and power, had vanished, leaving behind only a hollow shell, a ghost of its former glory. I stood on the balcony overlooking the scene, a sense of closure washing over me. My revenge was complete. The auction hall was empty now, the echoes of the gavel and the frantic bidding fading into an eerie silence. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight filtering through the high windows, illuminating the emptiness where a dynasty had once stood. I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble floor, each step a resounding declaration of victory. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, a broken whisper, a desperate plea for recognition. "Lena, wait, please." His cries echoed in the empty halls, a pathetic symphony of regret. I didn't turn back. He was nothing to me, less than nothing. He had made his choice years ago when he chose Alyssa over me, when he sacrificed me to protect his precious golden child. He had disowned me, discarded me, erased me from his life, and now he was reaping the consequences of his actions. I walked out into the sunlight, the city sprawling before me, a testament to human ambition and the relentless pursuit of power. But I was no longer a pawn in their game. I was a player, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had risen from the ashes of their betrayal to build her own empire. The Collins name, once a symbol of their dominance, was now a mark of their failure. Their legacy, their fortune, their pride, all reduced to dust. And I, Lena Collins, the daughter they had cast aside, was the one who had brought them down. I hailed a cab, the driver's eyes widening in recognition as I gave him my destination. The Collins mansion, once a symbol of their wealth and power, was now just another address, a fading memory of a life I had left behind. As the car pulled up to the gates, I saw them standing on the steps, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. Edward, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with despair. Alyssa, her eyes red-rimmed, her once proud posture broken. They watched as I stepped out of the car, my head held high, my eyes filled with a cold, hard determination. I didn't acknowledge them, didn't offer a word of comfort or condemnation. They were irrelevant, ghosts of a past I had finally conquered. I walked past them, my heels clicking on the pavement, the sound a final punctuation mark on their downfall. The gates closed behind me, shutting them out, shutting them off, erasing them from my life. I was Lena Collins, the untouchable, the woman who had risen from the ashes, the one who had played the game and won. And as I walked away from the ruins of their empire, I knew that my future was limitless, my power absolute. The Collins name was dead. Long live Lena Collins. I sipped my morning coffee, watching the sunrise from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city below was waking up, its streets filling with people rushing to jobs, to appointments, to lives that would never intersect with mine. The newspaper on my desk carried the headline, "Collins Industries officially dissolved, end of an era." The article painted a grim picture of my father's downfall, detailing his financial ruin, his social disgrace, his fall from grace. It was the final nail in the coffin of his legacy, the last chapter in the story of his empire. But for me, it was just the beginning. My phone rang, the name Lawrence and Associates flashing on the screen. I smiled, a cold, calculated movement of my lips. Lawrence and Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the city, had been courting me for weeks, eager to have me join their board of directors. "Miss Collins!" The voice on the other end greeted me, a mixture of respect and eagerness in his tone. "I trust you've had a chance to consider our offer." "I have, Mr. Lawrence," I replied, my voice smooth and controlled. "And I'm afraid I must decline." A pause, a sharp intake of breath. "May I ask why?" "Because," I said, a hint of amusement in my voice, "I'm not looking to be a part of someone else's empire. I'm building my own." I hung up, my decision made. The Collins legacy was over, but mine was just beginning. I had risen from the ashes of their betrayal, stronger, smarter, more ruthless than they could ever have imagined. The elevator doors opened and my assistant walked in, her arms filled with files, her face flushed with excitement. Miss Collins, she said, her voice breathless, the merger is complete. Lena Corp now owns controlling interest in Blackwater Industries. Blackwater Industries, once my father's biggest competitor, was now a part of my growing empire. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that had once been a thorn in my father's side was now a jewel in my crown. Excellent, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. And what about the other matter? The Collins mansion, she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It's being auctioned off next week. The creditors are desperate to recoup whatever they can. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. Make sure we have a representative there. Bid on it. But anonymously. She looked at me, surprise flickering in her eyes. You want to buy back your family home? No, I said, my voice cold and final. I want to tear it down. I want to erase every last trace of them, just as they tried to erase me. She nodded, making a note in her tablet. And what about the foundation? The board is waiting for your decision. The Lena Collins Foundation, my latest project, a charitable organisation dedicated to helping young women from disadvantaged backgrounds achieve their dreams. It was my way of ensuring that no other girl would suffer the way I had, would be discarded, overlooked, underestimated. Tell them I'll be attending the meeting this afternoon, I said, turning back to the window, to the city that was now mine. And make sure the press is there. I want everyone to know exactly what I'm doing. She left, the elevator doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. I was alone again, with my thoughts, my plans, my empire. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I opened it, a flicker of curiosity in my eyes. Lena, please, we need to talk. Edward. I deleted it without a second thought. He was nothing to me now, a ghost from a past I had conquered, a chapter in my life that was firmly closed. The Collins legacy was dead, buried under the weight of their arrogance and greed. But from its ashes, a new empire had risen. My empire. My legacy. I was Lena Collins, the untouchable, the woman who had played the game and won. And this was just the beginning. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new office, overlooking the city that was now mine. The skyline was changing, the old Collins Tower now replaced by a sleek, modern building bearing the Lena Corp logo. It was a symbol of my triumph, my ascension, my rebirth. The elevator doors opened and my assistant walked in, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Miss Collins, your 3 o'clock is here? I nodded, straightening my designer suit, a smile playing on my lips. Show them in. She hesitated, a flicker of concern in her eyes. Are you sure about this? After everything? I'm sure, I said, my voice firm and resolute. Show them in. She left, the doors closing behind her with a soft click. I turned back to the window, to the city spread out below me like a carpet of lights and shadows. My empire. My kingdom. The doors opened again, and I heard the hesitant footsteps, the nervous breathing, the palpable tension. I didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge their presence. Let them wait, let them sweat, let them feel, for just a moment, what it was like to be the supplicant, the one in need, the one without power. Lena, my father's voice, once so strong and commanding, now weak and trembling. Thank you for seeing us. I turned slowly, my face a mask of cool indifference. They stood before me, shadows of their former selves. Edward, his hair now completely grey, his face lined with worry and defeat. Alyssa, her designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack garments, her once perfect makeup now hastily applied, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent office. Mr. Collins, I said, my voice cold and formal. Miss Collins, to what do I owe this unexpected visit? They exchanged a look, a silent communication filled with desperation and defeat. It was Edward who spoke, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining his dignity. We've come to ask for your help. One last time." I raised an eyebrow, a gesture of mild curiosity. Help? What kind of help could the great Edward Collins possibly need from me? He swallowed hard, his pride visibly crumbling before my eyes. "Financial help. We're destitute, Lena. The mansion is gone, the company is gone, everything is gone." "And whose fault is that?" I asked, my voice laced with a deadly calm. "Who made the decisions that led to this downfall? Who ignored the warnings, dismissed the signs, disowned the one person who could have saved them?" He flinched, his eyes dropping to the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Alyssa, however, stepped forward, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You did this to us," she hissed, her voice trembling with emotion. "You orchestrated our downfall. You destroyed our family." I laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed through the office. "No, Alyssa, you did this to yourselves. Your arrogance, your incompetence, your blind faith in your own superiority. Those were the architects of your destruction. I simply hastened the inevitable." She stepped back, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. I turned to my father, my gaze piercing, my voice a deadly whisper. "You disowned me, Edward. You cast me aside like a broken toy. You called me ungrateful, useless, a stain on the Collins name. And now you come crawling back, begging for my help. What makes you think I owe you anything?" He lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine, filled with a desperate plea. "Because we're family, Lena. Despite everything, we're still family." "Family?" I echoed, my voice rising with barely contained rage. "You dare to use that word? You, who treated me like a shadow in my own home? You, who dismissed my accomplishments, belittled my efforts, compared me unfavourably to your precious golden child at every turn. You, who disowned me, cut me off without a penny, told me I was no daughter of yours." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You're not my family, Edward. You're nothing to me." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling down his weathered cheeks. "Please, Lena, I was wrong. I was blind. I didn't see your worth, your strength, your brilliance. I was consumed by my own pride, my own arrogance. I've lost everything, my company, my wealth, my reputation. Don't let me lose my daughter too. Not again." I studied him, this broken man who had once been the formidable Edward Collins, CEO of Collins Enterprises, titan of industry, master of his domain. How the mighty had fallen. "You lost your daughter," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "The day you chose Alyssa over me. The day you valued her charm over my intellect, her popularity over my competence, her smile over my substance. The day you looked at me with disgust and called me ungrateful." I turned away, walking back to the window, to the view of my empire. "It's too late, Edward. What you're looking at, what you're asking for, isn't forgiveness. It's a lifeline, it's self-preservation, it's the desperate act of a drowning man clutching at straws." I turned back to face them, my expression cold and final. "And I'm not in the business of saving people who are all too happy to watch me drown." Alyssa stepped forward, her face twisted with fury. "You heartless bitch! After everything you've done to us, you still can't find it in your heart to help your own family." "My heart?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You think this is about my heart? This is about justice, Alyssa. This is about consequences. This is about reaping what you sow." I pressed a button on my desk and the doors opened, my security team standing at attention. "This meeting is over. Please escort Mr. and Miss Collins out of the building." As they were led away, Edward turned back, his eyes pleading, his voice breaking. "Lena, please." I watched them go, their departure a final chapter in a story that had begun with betrayal and ended with justice. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences, just as I had once lived with the consequences of their actions. The doors closed behind them, and I was alone again. With my thoughts, my plans, my empire, I had won. I had beaten them at their own game, dismantled their empire, built my own on its ruins. I had taken their power, their prestige, their place in the world, and made it mine. And yet, I looked out at the city, at the empire I had built, at the world I had conquered. It was everything I had dreamed of, everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. But was it enough? The revenge I had sought, the justice I had demanded, the triumph I had achieved, it was complete. But what now? What came after revenge? I didn't know, but I had time to figure it out, all the time in the world, because I was Lena Collins, the Untouchable. And this was my world now. The years passed, my empire grew, and I watched as the world reshaped itself to accommodate my vision, my ambition, my power. The name Collins, once synonymous with Edward and his failed legacy, was now irrevocably linked to me, to Lena, the woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal, to build an empire that eclipsed her father's. I heard whispers about them occasionally, Edward and Alyssa, the fallen king and his disgraced princess. They lived in a small apartment in a forgotten corner of the city, surviving on the meagre income from Edward's job as a consultant for small businesses. Alyssa worked as a sales clerk in a department store, her beauty fading, her charm dulled by the harsh realities of a life without privilege. They were ghosts, spectres from a past I had conquered, a chapter I had closed. I didn't think about them, didn't wonder about their lives, their struggles, their regrets. They were nothing to me, less than nothing. Until the day the letter arrived. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, my name written in a shaky hand that I recognized immediately. Edward's handwriting, once so bold and confident, now trembling with age and infirmity. I almost threw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say that I would want to hear? But curiosity got the better of me, and I broke the seal, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. "My dearest Lena," it began, and I almost laughed at the presumption, the audacity. I was not his Lena, not his darling, not his anything. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. The doctors give me a few weeks at most. Cancer, they say, has spread too far to treat. I face the end of my life with many regrets, but none greater than the way I treated you." I was wrong, Lena. So terribly, unforgivably wrong. I was blinded by my own pride, my own arrogance, my own flawed perception of what constituted strength and success. I favoured Alyssa not because she was better, but because she was easier to understand, easier to love, easier to fit into the mould I had created for the perfect daughter. You were always the stronger one, the smarter one, the one with true vision and substance, and I was too blind, too stupid, too consumed by my own ego to see it. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I don't ask for your help. I know I have no right to it. I ask only that you know that in these final days of my life, I have recognised the truth. You were always the true heir to the Collins legacy. You were always the daughter I should have cherished, respected, trusted. I die a broken man, Lena. Broken by my own mistakes, my own failures, my own blindness. But in this breaking, there is a kind of clarity. I see you now, truly see you, for the extraordinary woman you are, and I am filled with a father's pride, even as I acknowledge that I have no right to claim any part in the remarkable person you have become. Be well, my daughter. Be happy. Be at peace. With love and regret, Edward Collins. I folded the letter carefully, my hand steady, my heart a frozen wasteland that no words, no sentiment, no deathbed confession could thaw. He was dying. The man who had discarded me, who had broken me, who had forced me to rebuild myself from the ground up. He was reaching out from the precipice of death, seeking what? Absolution? Connection? A final moment of father-daughter bonding before he stepped into the abyss. Too little, too late, I placed the letter in my desk drawer, alongside the disownment papers he had forced me to sign all those years ago. A matching set. The beginning and the end of Edward Collins' relationship with his elder daughter. I didn't attend his funeral. I didn't send flowers. I didn't acknowledge his passing in any way. He was already dead to me, had been for years. His physical death was merely a formality, a belated alignment of reality with my perception. Life went on. My empire continued to grow, to expand, to thrive. I was at the pinnacle of success, of power, of influence. I had everything I had ever wanted, everything I had ever worked for, everything I had ever dreamed of. And yet, there was a hollowness at the centre of it all, a void that no amount of success, no amount of wealth, no amount of power could fill. I had achieved my revenge, had orchestrated their downfall, had watched them crumble and fall. I had won. But what had I won? A life defined by the very people I had sought to erase from my existence. A success measured against their failure. An identity forged in opposition to the family that had rejected me. I was Lena Collins, the untouchable, the woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal to build an empire, the daughter who had surpassed her father, who had proven her worth beyond any shadow of a doubt. But I was also Lena Collins, the woman who had dedicated her life to revenge, who had channeled all her brilliance, all her talent, all her potential into the destruction of those who had hurt her. The woman who had let the past define her present, who had let old wounds dictate her future. Was it worth it? The years of planning, of waiting, of plotting, of executing my perfect revenge. The satisfaction of seeing them fall, of watching them grovel, of turning my back on their pleas for help. I didn't know. I still don't know. But I do know this. I am Lena Collins. I have built an empire from nothing. I have proven my worth to the world. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.